Morning. It's going to be story time, and today I'm going to read to you from my novel Beneath the Palms. Set in Florida, post Civil War. Originally, what I had wanted to do was show the juxtaposition between the cracker culture, generations old, original Floridians, to the wealthy industrialists that came down post Civil War to lay the foundations and the infrastructure for development. Just before this, which is going to be shown in the sequel, is the four Seminole Wars, the last of which, they did a straight line across Florida from the top and swept down all the way to the Keys, burning everything in their path. Needless to say, the Army came down on them hard and swiftly, taking 3/4 of them along the Trail of Tears to the Midwest, and the rest hightailing it into the Everglades, where they spent the next 100 years. And they're just, in this novel, resurrecting themselves and becoming, in the sequel, one of the wealthiest tribes on the planet when they procure Hard Rock Cafe and all its assets. So, anyway, here we go. This is just going to be a portion of a chapter called Kettle Drive. The 18-foot bullwhip curled through the thick air, snapping with a crack that echoed across the prairie. Bonaparte Mizzle, a wizened cowboy, known simply as Bone, stood up in his McLean saddle and whistled as at his dog nipping at the heels of the stragglers. The southern sun sank slowly beyond the horizon as quail scurried into the brush. They had just passed the northern tip of Lake Okeechobee earlier in the day and wouldn't make it to the hammocks for another few. It would take them just over 2 weeks, if they were lucky, to herd the tens of thousands of cattle roaming through the open rangelands of central Florida to the Gulf, where they'd be taken to markets in Havana. They had left Port Pierce 2 days before, where they had filled their saddlebags at Cobb's General Store, and already were running a solid herd of nearly 800 head. A friend of his and boss, Ziba, had spent the better part of the morning with his dogs rounding up about 100 head from the marshes that made up the headwater. It would be anyone's guess as to how many they'd end up with at the end of the 120-mile drive when they reached the docks at Bradenton, given that the Seminoles had just increased their herd by 50,000. But Bone wasn't complaining. He loved droving and was good at it, one of the best. He knew it, everyone knew it. When the bugs and the snakes and the sun and the sand got the best of most men, Bone rode on, slumped in his saddle, shaded by his wide-brimmed Stetson, spitting at the geckos unfazed. That's why Ziba hired him year after year, despite his drinking and overall surly attitude. Ziba Kingsley cracked his whip in code, signaling the other crackers that they were stopping for the night. The loop licked the length of the leather whip slowly, generating a resonating cracking sound when it flicked out the end that could be heard miles away. When the cracked code was repeated faintly off in the distance, Ziba circled round to where Bone had dismounted. Bone and Ziba and the others had made this run too many times to count, following the trail west, staying clear of the big lake to the south and the Kissimmee River to the north. The crackers had a dry trail on which to drive the free-ranging cattle to the coast. They had to find them first, of course, and convince them that it was in their best interest to head due west. That's where the dogs came in handy, the dogs and the whips. There was good money in hunting cattle, and heaven knows they could all use it. The Reconstruction hadn't really restored much in Florida because there hadn't been much there to begin with. What had been there, the Seminoles had burnt decades before, and wide swaths of prairie laid in waste. But there were newcomers, not all free slave like Tom Salas, looking for land and new beginnings. And with more people, there was less of everything. The railroad was expanding, and with it, Ziba anticipated the end of his trade. Until then, however, he and the other cracker cowboys would keep doing what it is they did best. He'd leave Bone in Bradenton to earn extra coin identifying the various brands because there wasn't anyone better at distinguishing between those cattle, whose cattle was whose, With a pocket full of Spanish gold, Zebra wouldn't see hide nor tail of him for months. Rolling out their bedrolls, the cowmen stretched themselves beneath the stars, where they had slept most of their adult lives and hoped it wouldn't rain. When the rains came, the crackers rushed to sit on their saddles and slept best they could upright in their blankets, draped over their heads, keeping the leather dry. They hadn't seen the lightning on the horizon before the dusk, but that didn't mean the dark, rolling clouds wouldn't come their way. While the men ate cold fried pork and swamp cabbage, their marsh tackies gazed nearby, and their dogs strayed with the herd, now heading for the tree line. Turkeys lofted onto low-lying branches in the pine woods, and the owls hunted, their broad wings sweeping in strong strokes the still air above them. Tomorrow they'd cross through Tom's ranch along Lake Istacopa, set between the Kissimmee River and Lake Wales Ridge, and Zeba prayed that the night riders droving with them kept to themselves. He had known Tom since the man had arrived at the end of the war to make a life on the brittle, open grasslands. He had always marveled at the former slaves' resolve. Now Tom owned thousands of acres and just about as many head. His wife, Lizzie, had just opened a school, and Zeba's wife, Anna, had been helping her raise funds and secure supplies. Anna Magdalene Jai had been brought from Senegal to Cuba to work as a slave on Frank Ferrara's sugar plantation. Having sired four of her children, Ferrara freed her, deeding her his farm at Fort George Island off of Jacksonville. That's where Zeba had first met her. She had become a cattle baron in her own right, and the long-haired Dusty Cracker had been sunk from the get-go. They married shortly thereafter. Anna was a good woman, a strong woman. She was also black as night. Zeba fretted for her when he was away on camel drives, as he did now for Tom. It gave him some comfort that the writer woman, Miss Harriet Beecher Stowe, and her preacher husband, who were now residents of Laurel Grove Plantation situated nearby on the St. Johns River, had befriended her. The Stowes had ironically purchased the old plantation that had once been the belle of the peninsula. With 9,000 acres, there had been 500 slaves tending to the cotton and sugar fields, as well as the expansive orange groves. Zeba could imagine his Anna sitting on the 12-foot wide veranda with Mrs. Harriet, watching the sun stream through the great oak trees, the breeze blow the Spanish moss. It was a pretty place, especially, as Harriet would say, the blues became intense as dusk, melting into a purple mist. As wild and harsh as Florida was, it had its soft, sweet spots too. He hoped his family and friends were safe from the cowardly cloaked riders and other evildoers. He surely did. The moon rose and the mosquitoes fed and the thunder grumbled threateningly miles away. Sliding his mess kit beneath his saddle, Zebra rolled over, tucking his blanket high over his shoulder. He slept soundly until the morning mist dripped off the palmetto in rhythmic plunks, and restless steers began to bellow. So, yep, therein lies the beginning of Beneath the Palms. So please, if historical fiction is of interest to you, or you just want to support my writing, go ahead and grab yourself a copy, digital or paperback format. Interestingly enough, because it's got 4 parts, each of which jump 40 or 50 years, I talk about the development of flight, aeronautics, now the space industry. I talk about baseball, and it's been decades since I've been into sports, so I needed a lot of help on those sections. Tana and Bruce Mertz and Jimmy Devereaux, my sister and brother-in-law, thank you very much for all the assistance you gave me on the baseball parts. And lots having to do with journalism, particularly women in journalism, and some twists on some of the standard Floridian characters that you read about all the time, like Flagler. There's a dark side to him too. Lots of celebrities from every walk made their way down here, and I touch on them. And again, this is the middle of a trilogy, a planned trilogy. Available on Amazon. Get yours today. Leave a review. Thanks for your support. Enjoy.